All right, we're live. Good morning. Unless you're across the pond, then good afternoon. But thanks for joining us this morning. Welcome to Getting Personal with Compt. I'm Lauren Schneider, the head of communications. This show is all about interviewing workplace experts and uncovering the ways that they are trying to make the employee experience a more human experience. We're all trying to build a healthier workplace. How do we do that? Today, I have with us Dr. Jim Kanichirayil. He's the VP of Growth at EngageRocket. You've probably seen him somewhere on the internet, highly engaged on LinkedIn. So I'm glad we're talking about engagement with someone who knows all about it. Dr. Jim, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation. So I'm sure we're going to cover a lot of ground, and I'm not exactly convinced if 20 minutes is enough runway for us to get through what we need to get through. But we're going to give it our good old college try.
I always feel that way with these conversations because we talk about things high level and then we realize there's so much more to unpack, which is the way with the employee experience and human resources and all of those good things. So I want to do high level really quick. Tell me about you, your expertise, your current role, because that'll give us kind of the lead into our conversation today.
Yeah, I think the best way to talk through all of that at a high level, I've always been in and around the talent space. So whether it was in staffing and recruiting, where I spent quite a bit of time, or in HR tech, which also accounts for another big chunk of my time there, a lot of my experience has been focused in those areas. I'm a big ass nerd, so when it comes to talent related stuff, my doctoral research is on employee retention and turnover. So a lot of the things that I talk about focus in those areas. And then I'm currently the VP of growth for EngageRocket. So we're a leadership effectiveness and employee engagement platform that primarily for the last 7-8 years has been active in the Asian market, and now we're launching in the US, and I'm primarily driving that growth. So hopefully that gives enough context for what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting to me because I feel like a lot of the platforms that we work with regularly are talking about global expansion the other way, but we're all trying to figure out like what are the steps that we need to be taking to foster an engaged workforce? How can we better retain employees? I saw this interesting survey. It's from the Conference Board job satisfaction survey. And it said a primary driver of job satisfaction is leadership. 80% of those who are satisfied with leadership are likely to stay, compared with 27% who weren't. Personally, totally agree with that. I've definitely had a terrible leader who, despite how awesome my coworkers were and how great my job was, made me want to hit the road. So tell me your thoughts about that.
No, I think I don't think the data on that has really shifted much. When I was this was years ago, when I was in the process of completing my dissertation, and we're looking at factors that drive employees out of a particular job that they're in. If you look at the top 5, 2 out of the top 5 reasons that were cited were leadership related issues. And what's interesting about that is when you look at the organizations that you join and you look at your exit plan within from an organization, your manager actually has the most influence on both of those elements. So if you take it a little bit deeper, Mercer actually recently did some research where they pointed to a couple of data points that when you look at trust, employee trust, and you compare it from immediate managers to senior managers, employees trust their immediate managers, at a rate of roughly 80%, and then senior managers at around 50%. So your immediate line manager has a lot of influence on what's happening at the ground level within your organization. And if you're not paying attention to arming and empowering those managers with what they need to be successful, you're going to have problems scaling and accelerating your organization and driving business results because you're going to be faced with sort of a revolving door.
So, what you said there was really interesting to me because I think a lot of the times we expect that those policies and that responsibility comes from human resources, comes from HR, or senior leadership. We always talk about how things trickle down from the top, but you're saying direct managers are the ones who are really the key to fostering employee engagement. So, can we talk a little bit about that shift of responsibility, what that looks like? Are there some key steps they need to follow?
So I want to frame this a particular way. I think within, you know, accelerating growth or scale up organizations, there's this common belief, and this might exist in larger organizations too, that all of these people related initiatives sit with HR. And I think that's a mistake for a lot of organizations because when you look at organizational structure, a lot of organizations, you will see that HR is consistently under staffed. They're running really lean, really thin, and oftentimes HR is just in firefighting mode. So when we look at the question about what are some of the things that managers can do, I think this is an enterprise-wide responsibility. It's not an either or. Everybody needs to be committed to this because otherwise you're going to be dealing with a lot of sunk costs because you can't retain your people. So from a practical perspective, if you're looking at how do we stop the bleeding when it comes to employees leaving the organizations, managers need to be really disciplined about the pace of their communication, the frequency of their communication. And this sounds really simple, but they need to be hyper focused on building relationships with each person in their reporting structure. And if you're not taking a deliberate and disciplined approach to regular one-on-ones and structured one-on-ones where you're not using it as a status report exercise, you're going to be much better off than those organizations that aren't doing one-on-ones, or those managers that aren't doing one-on-ones, or the ones that are doing one-on-ones but use it as a pipeline review or a status update. That's not the purpose of the exercise.
Right. There's no like rapport building there, no relationship building. And it's hard enough to do that in the organizations that we see now, where so many of us are hybrid or remote. And it takes a concerted effort to build those relationships beyond just the here's the list of things that I've accomplished and here are the questions that I have for you as my manager today.
So it's interesting, Lauren, that you cited the remote or hybrid structure. And Chris Williams, if you aren't following him on LinkedIn or TikTok or YouTube, you definitely should. So look him up at the CL Will. And one of the things that he made, one of the points that he made recently, and he was a former high-level executive at Microsoft. So Microsoft, he worked under Bill Gates and then later Steve Ballmer, and he was involved in that entire arc where Microsoft really grew into where they are right now. But one of the things that he noted and observed is that remote work is framed nowadays, or hybrid work is framed nowadays as if it's some sort of new occurrence. And he tells stories about how his dad was in sales and the head office was in like Cleveland, and his dad was on the road mainly in the Southeast or Southwest, and rarely had to report in. So this whole idea that report management and building relationships is difficult in a remote environment, that's set on its ear because companies have been managing remote workforces for ever. So when you hear this steady drumbeat coming from certain executives saying that we need to return back to the office so that we can build stronger teams and have collaboration and all that sort of stuff, it's kind of BS. So, you can figure out how to, and especially now with so much technology out there that allows you to connect with people asynchronously. I mean, there's no reason why you can't carve out 30 minutes to an hour every day to meet with one of your reports and really do a check-in and find out where they're at and where they're blocked. I mean, it's as simple as that. Hey, Jaquanda. Jaquanda Nelson is awesome. She's a great DEI practitioner. So if you aren't following her, follow her as well.
Thank you for joining us, Jaquanda. One thing that I wanted to ask you about then, because I think you're totally right. It's such BS to say like, oh, well, it's so hard to reach people when they're not in front of me. That's not true. I think at Compt, we're doing it really well. We're fully remote and we are pretty good at communicating with one another. But the key to that is the transparent communication and not just talking at someone, but listening. I know one of the things that we were going to talk about is consistent listening. So what does it look like to truly listen to the things that your employees are saying, take those things and then turn it into actionable change?
So there's two different ways that you can do it. You can do it at the micro level, and that comes out in your one-on-one. So if you're constructing a really effective one-on-one, that structure should be, and Chris points this out, and he's done great segments on how to construct effective one-on-ones, but you should have one topic that you talk about during your one-on-one. Part of that topic, or that one element should be, okay, what's going well? Where are you getting stuck? And solve for that one area where you're getting blocked. And that should be the weekly cadence. And that's beyond just the how are you doing part of the conversation. So rather than doing a status update, if you use that framework, do the personal check-in, and then tackle one area together collaboratively that you can work. And that's at a micro level, how you can manage that part of the exercise, and really focus on listening. And at the end of the one-on-one, you should always have an agenda for the next one that recaps the progress that was made from that one problem. Where is it, a week later? And that way you're not getting overloaded with 6 different things that you need to accomplish in a week on top of what you already need to do. At the macro level, and here's where it gets interesting. Organizations will do pulse surveys and they'll do temp checks and all that sort of stuff all the time. And they'll get all this feedback. And then more often than not much is acted on. And that's really when where a lot of those initiatives fall flat, is that you're getting feedback from your enterprise, but you're not acting on it. So if you're seeing common themes come up, pick one and really communicate the initiative, or communicate what you need to communicate so that you're acting on those things or on that one thing to solve it. And that's where you build credibility at the organizational level from the rank and file. If you're doing all these surveys, you're getting feedback, but you're not really communicating what you're going to act on, how that's going to take shape, when it's going to happen, the impact that it's going to have, and who's going to be involved, it's not going to track well overall. So that gives you two sets of perspectives. But I mean, I think one of the consistent gaps that exist across really all levels of an organization is the pace of communication and really the quality of communication. If you're not over communicating, or if you're not communicating effectively enough to everybody that rolls into you, that also creates a problem where you have disengagement, where people don't know exactly, well, how does this fit in with my day-to-day work? So that's a gap that needs to be solved as well.
I feel like we unintentionally create silos, the gaps that you're talking about, when we're maybe trying to be transparent, but can only be transparent about certain things, or maybe we just have different communication styles. So it's interesting the way that one-on-ones in particular can really change that narrative. I know that's something that we have been doing for a long time at Compt, and has been incredibly instrumental for me, and I imagine everyone else on the team, to figure out like what are the things that I need to accomplish. But beyond that, I build more of a rapport with my manager and an understanding that we're just two people trying to do a job and trying to move this company forward.
Yeah, and I think one of the so my lens is always in the sales side because that's kind of where I've lived throughout my career. And I think when you're looking at sales organizations, what are the problems that sales organizations face? They typically have high levels of churn, and especially in a distributed environment, there is a lot of chaos that happens. So in those environments where I see leaders go wrong over and over again is using that one-on-one period as a pipeline review. And that really doesn't do anything in terms of connecting the folks at the front line to the strategic vision, the organizational mission, vision, values, and bridging that gap. And that's really the conduit or the role that the managers play, is connecting that together. But if all of your one-on-ones are purely focused on status reports of or status updates on whatever initiative or whatever task you're working on, you never build that. And really, if you look at it from the employee perspective, if all you're going to do is talk about business, you're going to create an organization of clock punchers who aren't tied to any of the bigger purpose things that your organization is trying to do. So what type of organization do you want? Do you want an organization of clock punchers, or do you want an organization that has a lot of people who are committed to the broader objectives, to the higher purpose?
We talk about those broader objectives, higher purpose, the overall workplace culture. And I think a lot of what plays into that is also employee feedback. So, how would you recommend getting valuable feedback that these managers can act on? Because is the one on one the place for that, or is that really just for the relationship building? Does there need to be a different avenue where employees can feel comfortable enough, and maybe it takes some time for them to feel comfortable enough coming to their manager and saying, here are the things that I think need to change, here are the ways that we're moving forward, here are the things that we're doing well, etc.
That's a fantastic question. And there's multiple ways that you can tackle it. But I think one of the interesting ways that you can set the tone for the type of organization you want to become, because all of us are interested in becoming an elite organization or part of an elite organization. And the data shows that the more effective, well, let me take a bigger step. The candidate experience often translates into the employee experience. So if you're looking at how do you create a feedback culture, well, that has to start from the time that a candidate enters your talent pool. So what does that candidate journey look like? So you need to make sure that you're at some level polling candidates that aren't selected on how that process went. And then the critical step, and this is where it becomes important for an organization, is employee outcomes are largely driven or largely predictable based on the onboarding process. So when a candidate is hired and they go through the onboarding process, if you want to create a listening culture, a culture where feedback is encouraged, start at that onboarding process. What worked well, what didn't, how can we change, how can we improve? And if you're having your early entrance into your environment giving feedback, and then you're acting on that feedback to make the onboarding process smoother, you're creating that expectation that this is the type of organization where feedback is embedded throughout every stage of that employee life cycle, and then it becomes easier to kind of launch off. It's not just a one-off thing. You have to look at the entire employee life cycle and see where you're embedding feedback as a core value or a core practice in your pursuit of becoming an elite organization. So that's where you start. And then if you're doing it well there, you can apply it to all other areas. You can apply it to day-to-day feedback. You can apply it to feedback review, performance reviews. You can apply it to 360 feedback. You can apply it, in all sorts of different ways. And it doesn't become one of those things where employees are looking at these sort of feedback mechanisms as a source of skepticism.
I think that's a really great response. I have so many questions based on that, and we're like at time. As we were talking about at the beginning, there's so much to dive into here. So I want to, before we go, if our viewers can walk away with anything, what are like your top like actionable takeaway tips, something from this conversation that they can think about for the rest of today and moving forward?
So there's two things that I would encourage. If you're at the manager level and you're not creating a consistent cadence of one-on-ones where you're doing a temp check on your reports, start doing that now, because that's going to get you off of the constant hiring and training hamster wheel that you've been on. Because it's likely, if you're not consistently doing those one-on-ones, you probably have a turnover issue as well, because your people aren't dialed into you and they're not dialed into the organization. So that's one. Number two, and this is at the organizational level, the business has to stop thinking of all of these people-related topics as an HR thing. It's an organizational imperative, because here's the reality of it. Every business function within an enterprise has initiatives that they want to launch and execute well on and do all of these things for. But if you're constantly burning resources in replacement costs, so every person that you lose, you're going to burn up to 200% to 250% of their first year annual salary in replacement costs. If you want to stop the bleeding there and have those resources allocated to your initiatives, start listening to your people and start acting on what they're telling you, and then you'll build that elite organization. So those are the two things that I would focus on.
You make it sound so simple. Jim, I wanted to thank you for your time today. If people want to follow up with you, find you on the internet, interact with you, ask you questions about how to better engage their team, where can they do that?
You can find me on LinkedIn, and you can also check out the EngageRocket page. But the easiest way is LinkedIn. I'm on there all the time. You'll see me posting about this stuff, representation and sales, a bunch of other stuff. So that's the easiest way.
Fantastic. Thank you for your time today. Everyone else, thank you for joining us. You can catch the replay pretty much anywhere. I have this streaming across LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter. We put it on our website, www.compt.io. Where there's a whole Getting Personal page. You can follow us there. You can send me LinkedIn messages if you would like to be a guest on the show, because I am always looking for workplace experts to chat with. Let me know. I'd love to talk to you. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.